Working with Robert was always a challenging detective story. The profession teaches you to be working towards something which is predictable, and working with Robert was anything but predictable.
It was just like breathing to him, putting a room together, finding objects. They just spoke to him. People would come and ask him, what's on trend or what's fashionable? And Robert said, I don't understand what you're asking. He said, I just put things together I like. He said, I'm not a decorator, I'm an assembler.
We had a really, really difficult time understanding each other in the beginning. I could understand every third word he said. He probably was the same about me. I think we just kind of were intrigued by each other. We would fly in and he would blindfold me and just walk me to a room and take the blindfold off, and it was just genius. And I screamed, and we just thought we were each pretty funny and great, and I learned everything from him.
Robert was always teaching me something. Every day I would learn something, which is what kept me excited, and you learn a little bit, you want to learn some more and some more and more and more.
Both of us shared that love of things not being perfect. The colour had to be right, but the design didn't matter if it wasn't perfect.
I remember when I was first thinking about coming to work for Robert, and I sat next to somebody at a dinner party, and I didn't know about Robert. And she said, well, have a look, find a picture of Swangrove, the hunting lodge he created for the Duke of Beaufort. She said, quite honestly, if I died and woke up in that room, I'd know I'd arrived in heaven.
I have been making fabrics with Robert virtually since he started his collection. Before that, he was a great friend of mine, so I had the fortune to work with my best friend, really.
I first met Robert when I had just left university, and I needed something to do, and he needed someone to help him for a couple of weeks while he moved offices. After, I don't know, however long, he offered me a job, so I stayed.
The first job was when they moved from Ashton to Minor. Robert said, would you draw up a conservatory for us? I started drawing it and learned myself. I mean, it was 3 meters by 3 meters. It was like a little poem in conversation with the building. We started that conversation and it didn't stop.
The first time I even heard of Robert Kime was when we were looking at houses in the country. In a typical way of mine, I called his office and I just said, oh, you know, we have this house in the country and we want you to do it. And he gave me his typical Robert in the beginning. Darling, we have to meet in person. I think for Robert, he wanted to make sure that he was inspired by the house as much as he was inspired by working with me and with my husband. And I think when he saw Wraxall, he was inspired by it because it was totally empty. There wasn't a stick of furniture in it.
That building was the biggest puzzle of all because we had the kind of monument in our hands which did not make sense. It was impossible to live in. The way Robert allowed the building to tell its own story by peeling layers back and finding what was the logic for its new voice was supremely well done in Wraxall.
I said to Robert, I don't want any red and I don't want any gold. And Patrick Kinmont, who also is an amazing creative, said to me, well, darling, you know, no red, no gold. Well, the first thing we bought for you is red and it's gold. And it was this, which is from the Duke of Leeds. And they found it in an auction in Paris, and they were just like so over the moon about it.
To be able to work as hard as we did and to come away from it with, you know, your cheeks aching with the, with the humour, it was a very, very enjoyable job.
Robert was a great enabler and allowed you to do your own thing and didn't really interfere. If you'd done something well, he'd say, well done. And that was a high praise from Robert.
It's a team, it's a family. He makes that family feeling and atmosphere.
He was himself in a way that wasn't apologetic. Every person that we worked with and he encountered was taken seriously, whether it's the carpenter or the client with the highest role in the country.
First time I was in his barns, we walked up this ladder to the attic to look through just stacks of fabric. He was going down to get tea. I was taking so long up there, and came upstairs. He said, "How did you find all my hidden treasures?" I just dug under everything. I mean, I sneezed for I think a week after that. It was so dusty up there. But that's what we loved.
I think invariably his clients became friends, and he wanted to get to know them. He wanted to know, where did they live in a house? He used to say, if you can live in a house for a year, the house will talk to you and the house will dictate what should go where.
Robert was absolutely unafraid about buildings and how one might begin to think of new access, new balance, new spatial sequences. So it was always a delight to arrive at what was the Sleeping Princess.
His favourite thing to do was go on a buying trip. Istanbul was one of his favourite places to go. He showed me some of the architecture, the mosques. It's an amazing city.
Robert just walked and he could spot anything. He could spot something sort of in that stand over there on the right.
It could have been the most grandest, finest piece of furniture, but it equally could have been a battered old basket. It was the object. That was what he was drawn to.
Robert had such a huge vocabulary of profile, detail. You know, he would know a door and date it instantly.
La Gonette is a beautiful house. Robert and Helen discovered it when they went to stay with their friend Michael Trapp. There'd been a fire in the house. They went to see it and Helen bought it.
Helen and I started that job, and we were interviewed by the mason in the village. Helen and I sat in front of this flinty, huge man who had piercing blue eyes, and we didn't speak enough French for him to really be convinced that we were possible clients. But somehow there was a respect across it, and he said, yes, all right, I'll do it. The building had been burnt and all the timbers were on the floor. So there was a major effort with something which was a beast in distress, and they all brought their local knowledge and skills and materials to put it back together. So it was like surgery.
La Gonette is very, very much Helen's house. Beautifully comfortable and serene and lovely to be in.
We needed something which was anchoring the whole house. On our visits, we would poke about. We got to this yard. There was a huge pile of exquisitely thin stone steps laid out on the ground randomly all over the place. I must have spent days with those stones, measuring them. It became logical about how the stair was built. We found an engineer who would do it, and he built a little wall underneath the stair whilst everything was setting. The builder said, "Can we leave the wooden wall underneath, holding it up?" And the engineer said no, and just put his boot underneath it and kicked the wall out. And the stair, of course, was completely stable, nothing moved. And it was one of those extraordinary moments where you think, oh, and it was fine.
His rooms are timeless. He always used to come back from visiting a house that he may have done 25, 30 years ago. And he'd say, with some pleasure and satisfaction, they haven't changed a thing.
One of the things that he told me in the very beginning, he said, I want this to be your dream. I want, when you're in the middle of your world and your day and your stress, I want this to take you away.
He liked to sit in a comfy chair. He liked to be comfortable in the room. It was important to him that the room was interesting. You want to have interesting things to look at.
When he wrote his book, he first of all wanted to call it Safe Houses, because I think even as a small boy, he used to disappear to his parents' shed where there was furniture, and he would create dens and places he felt secure. I think he had a bit of an unsettled childhood, and so to be able to create a safe place for himself, That's how I think the decorating really evolved.
A room cannot be perfect. It has to have a table that your grandmother had, or that your great-grandfather had, or something that isn't perfect New York Park Avenue.
He would find something beyond in an object that some may define as romance, but something that added to it.
Most people that walk in here think this was always here, but it wasn't, and that's the magic of Robert Kime.
He was completely true to himself. He wouldn't do something he didn't like. And that's fairly unique too.
He had a very self-deprecating view of himself and was really a modest man, although he had some of the best decorating jobs in the world.
It was possible to bring Robert very far away from his core of interest. He sort of got an ability to be able to stretch historically back to the Egyptian and forward to brutalism and be as comfortable thinking across the whole range.
I took him to Lancashire the year before last. We actually went to visit Stonyhurst College, and I remember we walked past a cabinet in the museum there, and Robert had tears in his eyes and he said, "This is Thomas More's nightcap." And he looked at me and he said, "Chris, I'll never forget this."
Robert was hugely important to me.
Robert means everything to me. He's a great, great loss. A huge gap that will never be filled.
I thought of him really as an uncle or older brother. He had that effect on me.
He taught an awful lot to all of the team.
My life isn't the same without him, as is a lot of people's life not the same without him. But for him, I'll carry on doing the fabrics that I know he'll like. And he'll be saying, "You've done all right."
You do find yourself saying, what would Robert have said? What would he have thought? How would he have looked at this?
From the word go, Helen was really central to both the practice and the decision about home. And of course, I've designed many kitchens with Helen. It's a very tender thing about making sure that it's as fitting to life as possible was Helen's genius.
She was a wonderful cook. She just made you feel welcome and warm, and we loved going there.
Helen and Robert were a terrific team. They both had very different careers and they complemented one another, and Helen would always give her final blessing to a room he'd created. I think he probably was never pleased until Helen had given it her blessing.
Robert became one of my most cherished friends. He was a gift, I think, to anybody that worked with him. He was gentle, he had a crazy sense of humor. He was one of the most special people I've ever known.
I think Robert was just a dearest friend.
What he managed to leave will last.
As a decorator, he'll be remembered as one of the greats.
He just had this incredible sense of knowing what would be right. He was a unique creative genius, really.